Lovely, thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Service Transformation Committee for Education and Skills on the 4th of December. The temperature's dropping, Santa's on his way. So we'll dive into the agenda quickly. Have we got any apologies for absence, Gareth?
From Councillor Mike White, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. Agenda item number 2, disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. Do we have any? No, okay, thank you. Number 3 on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. So can I ask us if we can scan the minutes of the last meeting, pages numbered 1 to 3. So page number 1, page number 2, and page number 3. And if we're all content, and then I can sign them as a correct record. Are we content, everyone? Yes, no dissenters. Thank you very much. So we can move swiftly on to the 4th item on the agenda, learner progress. And we've got a presentation from Di Thomas, our Principal School Improvement Advisor. I don't know if I'm handing straight on to Di or whether we're going to have a prelim from Rodri. I'm not sure. Or are we going straight to Di?
Or straight to Di today, Jay.
There we go, lovely. Okay, over to you then, Di.
Thanks, Chair. Gareth, have you got the presentation to share, or do you need me to do it?
If you can do it, that's easier because I can't see anybody there. No, any hands up or anything. But
okay.
if you can't, I can.
Yeah, you bear with me while I get the tech to work. So whilst I'm doing that, Chair, in the background, so I'm going to just talk about where we're at with this piece. So firstly, one omission from this piece, from the presentation I'm about to share, will be an item that has been an update to the guidance, to Curriculum for Wales guidance, which is in the 14 to 16 space. There's been updated guidance with that respect, and therefore what I'm about to share hasn't taken into consideration of that. So when that talks about curriculum design, and there's been some subtle differences to the way that schools are expected to design their curriculum for 14 to 16-year-olds, given the changes to the specifications potentially for GCSEs at Key Stage 4. So, and we haven't considered that here. Overall, what I've aimed to do now, Chair, through the highlighting of as I see it, pertinent points from the guidance, from Curriculum for Wales's guidance, and taking into consideration what we've said so far. These points are what I would see as headline figures and subheadings that would form part of the draft documentation in terms of a principal paper for Swansea's principles for pupil progression. So overall, that's where I've got to. Each item will then require us to, pad out essentially to make it read in a much more practical way, because of course it'd be very difficult to demonstrate that in its entirety today. And there is a piece of work to do to further engage with both the school improvement team, the wider school improvement team, and certainly with schools, practitioners, etc. But I can't do that until such time where we've got an agreement, broadly speaking, on the way forward to write something in draft form to take it to them. So that's where I've got. Chair, I'll pause there if that's okay, whilst I just click a button or two to get the presentation on screen, and happy to field any questions at this stage.
Okay, thanks, Dave.
Okay, button clicking is going well, but just not fast enough, but as is the case always. Yeah, there we go. So I can see Rodri, just a thumbs up, Rodri, if the presentation's showing. Okay, so diolch. Okay, Chair, assuming everybody's comfortable, you will have seen the background to this. So this effectively would be the background part, the introductory part of the principal's paper, which outlines the role of assessment. There'd be some slight changes in this, given what I said earlier in terms of 14 to 16. The role of assessment, those three underlying principles, with a focus sharply on the first 2 bullet points, because the third one, as I see it in Swansea, leads us to an understanding or a better understanding through the lens of school improvement. And I don't think that's the core purpose of what we're trying to achieve. And these are unchanged, but supporting the individual day-to-day, ongoing day-to-day basis. These things are that were in the previous iteration of the presentation. Again, remain unchanged, but would be certainly bolstered in the paper, the draft paper that I bring to you. And again, you know, the second item about the third understanding about group progress is a lot about supporting robust self-evaluation. Although we need to reflect that there are groups of learners that we would need to consider their progress. For example, in a city such as Swansea, the influence of pupils who are eligible for free school meals. We need to certainly keep an eye on vulnerability. But I wouldn't be keen for us to make a list of those groups. I think that list would need to be non-exhaustive, and one that schools should be given autonomy to consider which groups of learners they would be focusing on, although, you know, there would be some that we would be certainly considering, you know, in the main, EFSM being one of them. And then overall, the summary, where we've got an identification of some effective practice, some principles of effective practice, and moving forwards to try and support that culture of effective practice in terms of pupil progress being a holistic view, one that doesn't talk so much about assessments, that talks about holistic assessment holistically in terms of curriculum design and review. That was a summary from the previous my previous meeting with an idea of what's to come next. And I haven't been able to do all of these things that are on the slide here, but certainly I'm hopeful that from what I'm about to share in the next few slides, we'll have had a better understanding of what this paper would look like and how the guidance in its form is going to take some shape. So before I set about, I'm broadly thinking this is going to be called Swansea's Principles of Learner Progression, although the problem with the word principles is that there's a formal mandatory element of curriculum for Wales called the Principles of Progression. So I don't like to confuse, so we might need to consider what the title of it is, but it's not, you know, that's nothing to worry about. But the first item, really, really important, that would form a distinct pathway would be that when schools, and this is straight out of the guidance, when schools design and or consider, that means redesign from my view, in the adoption of a curriculum, that it must align with the mandatory elements of the Principles of Progression. So the Principles of Progression are a mandatory document. I'll be honest with you, it's not an item that schools engage very heavily with, and the reason for that is because it's quite high level, although I have and will be able to indicate some areas which I think we could perhaps support schools a little bit better to understand, as well as those overarching principles of progression, of which there are 5. Each area of learning and experience, as referred to in the guidance area, has its own set of individual principles of progression. So, for example, there's 5 principles of progression, broadly speaking, overall, and then each of those are then detailed further in each area of learning and experience. So literacy, communication and languages has a set, mathematics and numeracy does, and so does the other 4 AOLEs. So between them, they do help to describe some principles about progress, but what they don't do is they don't describe the linear progression that pupils could or couldn't make in terms of the understanding and skills and knowledge that would be taught through an area of learning experience. That would come from somewhere else. The 5 principles of progression are described on the screen there. And if you were to say to a head teacher and or practitioner, can you describe to me how your school is supporting pupils to make progress in increasing effectiveness? it's highly likely that they're going to respond with a blank face, and that's because there's very high level of detail in there. So a school would need to unpick each of those things, and it would be very difficult for us to describe or prescribe to a school what progress should look like in that particular field. But it's about the engagement with the guidance and the unpicking of that through the lens of a school's curriculum and how they've designed it. So we would need to expand on that in order to that it provides enough autonomy, but some clarity and direction for schools and settings. And what I have done is, in order to try and articulate what I just said in a clearer way, using that increasing effectiveness principle of progression, I've highlighted, and I hope colleagues can see it, I've highlighted some of the items which are a little bit more tangible, Chair. So for example, in the principle that is increasing effectiveness, it asks schools to make sure pupils can progress in how they seek appropriate support. Well, what that means is, how do kids find ways to solve problems and ask for help progressively? So is it a trouser leg pulling moment when you're in nursery, or putting your hand up in year 3, or go into a thesaurus and or an alternative means of online information via AI, for example, when you progress through to older ages? So, and that independence and that those sources those sources of information, that's what that's asking us to do. And then if you look at the next item, asking more sophisticated questions, question and answer skills, this is really important here. That's not something that you would see in an area of learning and experience principles of progression in a piece of guidance. This is overall, how are we supporting pupils to ask and answer more sophisticated questions in order for them to better their understanding? So that's one clear item. And that pupils become more sophisticated and more attuned to their own self-evaluation. So how does a 3-year-old judge the quality of their own work? That's going to look very different to what an A-level student would judge the quality of their own work, and or how they utilize peers to do so too. And then the next item, obviously, in the development and identification of their own next steps. So how are we supporting pupils to identify their own next steps? And lastly, on that item, and this is just one of the principles of progression, there's obviously 4 others. It talks about self-regulation. So how are pupils finding ways to make sure that they're ready for learning, and that any barriers that they've got through their emotional unwellness is being mitigated. So again, highlighted elements that we could consider for subheadings in the document. Overall, then, another explanation that actually what is progress, so progression in learning, for example, is the development of skills and knowledge over time, and that the areas of learning and experience, the AOLEs, and their associated guidance do provide us with some words that suggest the progress that pupils need to make in an area of learning experience, but schools in the main will need to unpick this with their clusters. So what I mean by that is there a shared understanding of progression in the AOLE of humanities through the statements of what matter, which are mandatory? So for example, I'll flip, if we think about the key theme around sustainability, which we might see in science and technology, for example, what does sustainability look like for a 3-year-old, and what does sustainability look like for a 16-year-old? And in the main, schools have engaged particularly pretty well to develop that shared understanding of progression maps, but we would then support that through some guidance around this item here. Another part of the Curriculum for Wales guidance in terms of progression is not only that understanding of progress in the areas that I've just spoken to you about, or the word discipline is used, but how is that deepened and broadened? So that is making reference to the application of those skills across the curriculum. So how are we broadening those skills? So we're not just asking pupils to continually add 2 and 2 together until they're really good at it. Are they able to do that in different contexts? So that's an item there. And then we need to focus on the words capacities, attributes, and dispositions. So one of the items that might well have been missed in the guidance, because we got heavily involved in the development of a vision and or the what we teach, is that there's not a specific focus on pupil attributes. So the 4 purposes do allow us to consider the a pupil's dispositions and attributes, but not in a detailed enough way, in my view. So we would like to see some more guidance in the paper around that, the development of dispositions and attributes. So there's a little bit more on that in a moment. And then I begin to highlight some really key points for discussion here. So part of the Curriculum for Wales guidance in terms of pupil progression also makes reference to the characteristics associated with the 4 purposes. It's on my next slide, and how those characteristics impact on the planning of the experiences that schools plan for pupils. So we can't separate curriculum design from progress, this progression item, and we're never going to find a distinction between which comes first, the horse or the cart, because does pupil progress come first as a consideration, or does our curriculum design come first? It's chicken and egg. We're never going to define that. They should be done together. So without an idea of what we think pupil progress should look like on an individual basis and or in our context, we're not going to be able to design a curriculum that's suitable. So we need to do that in tandem, and key to that is having a really good understanding of our vision. What's our vision for the pupils in this particular school or setting, and or the skills that they require, the deficiencies in the skills that they have, but the skills that they will then require for us to teach and support the development of. So a lot of words for me just to say, if you take the 4 purposes, and I've highlighted one of those 4 purposes there, and apologies, you won't be able to read potentially the characteristics that sit underneath that those 4 purposes. I'll read them out too. Sorry, I'm just flicking over to my screen over here. You'll see that the ambitious, capable learners ready to learn throughout their lives, and in order for them to do that, that will be embodied by pupils who set themselves high standards. So I think we need to make this particularly clear what that might look like. And they're building up a body of knowledge and skills. They ask questions in order to solve problems. They communicate effectively in different forms, using both Welsh and English. They can explain ideas and the concept. So the 4 purposes really do, or the dispositions and characteristics really do help us to make sense of what we want pupils to be able to do under each of those 4 purposes, or be able to do, broadly speaking, of course, and schools need to make reference to that when they're planning those learning experiences. I've mentioned it previously, but the area knowledge, that learning progress doesn't just reflect area knowledge. So like I said, specifically maths, but also reflects the capabilities reflected in the 4 purposes, as I've just mentioned, but also the integral skills, and there are a set of skills that are integral to the 4 purposes. So those would be developed provided we offer experiences that support exposure to those items. But a mandatory element, and undone in my view, or underdone rather, is the cross-curricular skills. So how are we supporting pupils to make progress in literacy, numeracy, and digital competence? But how are we supporting them to apply those skills across the curriculum? So, and then therefore, are we supporting school-based practitioners to not track, but to have a really good understanding of the progress that pupils make in those cross-curricular skills? What's seen all too often is that they can add and take away in a discipline in a subject specific way in isolation, but pupils find it difficult to apply that to different contexts. So the authenticity that Curriculum for Wales, Mike, provides us with the opportunity for pupils to flourish in their local environment is really, really key here. So that's something I would definitely want us to reflect in the guidance piece that we've got. There's a slide on here about the cross-curricular skills, just as a reference. But what's really interesting to me and quite important is the items at the bottom. You may not be able to see them on the presentation on the screen you've got now, but they're pretty straightforward. It's just I think we've forgotten develop across the curriculum, develop listening, reading, and writing skills. This needs to be front and center from my perspective, to be able to use and solve number problems, and to be confident using a range of technologies in a digital sense. So how are we making sure that we plan for progression in those cross-curricular skills too? And it's very difficult to find an order of priority for these items, and I'm not suggesting that these are in this particular order. However, it seems quite complex, but when we look at it simply, this is about good teaching and learning. So where does the good teaching and learning sit in this space? And Welsh Government have provided us with a non-exhaustive list of pedagogical principles. So although schools have reflected on them, I'm not sure that we've done that really well. So I think, and I've got them listed next on the next slide. But I think we should be making reference to our to improving teaching and learning through a principled set of good procedures and practices for teaching and for learning. So the examples are in the next slide. Again, apologies, it's all crammed in a little bit. But you know, for example, one of the pedagogical principles would be that practitioners challenge all learners by encouraging them to see the importance in sustained effort. That's having high expectations. And Chair, one that rings true to the pair of us and colleagues around the table here is number 6, creates authentic contexts for learning. So Curriculum for Wales allows us to consider these really well. But I find these particularly useful. And another example would be means employing assessment for learning principles. So one of the items that we spoke about would be formative assessment arrangements, as outlined in the previous slide iteration. Does that look like the feedback to learner policy needs to be really strong? And is there an example of where there's some strength in the city, and we can provide that? And then what I wanted the guidance to reflect on is what is everybody's roles in this, and what's on the screen now. And I was really keen to see this, and it's not something that I think schools have engaged with particularly well, is who needs to be involved in this process. And thankfully, we haven't seen here everybody involved. We haven't got governors written down here and non-teaching staff. We've got 4 fundamental partners in this: leaders, practitioners, learners, and parents, carers, and other partners. And this is straight out of the guidance. But you'll see from the first bullet point that active engagement between the learner and practitioner on a regular basis is at the heart of supporting learner progression. The key for me is that word active, those words active engagement. And what that might look like is regular dialogue between the adult, the practitioner, and the pupil, the learner, in and throughout their learning. And whether that gets written down or whether that doesn't get written down, that active engagement between both parties is really key. And that's why I've highlighted 2 of those partners, the practitioners and the learners, whilst there's a fair list of responsibilities for leaders and for parents, carers, and external partners. I've wanted to focus on these 2 just for the purpose of today. I couldn't fit all of this bilingually on one slide, I'm afraid. So you can see there, obviously, this is the practitioners. And this gives us an idea. And again, apologies if it's a little too small for you to see at the screen. So I'll read out some of the key items as I see them. So you can see that one of the fundamental roles of the practitioner is to plan for, and not just plan for, but to provide effective learning experiences that are age appropriate and support the development of each individual learner. So I'm highlighting some key items here that could support that with your gift, we could ensure finds its way into the guidance. It enables learners to appreciate where they are in their learning. And I think what they mean is, does that help learners to know what they're good at and what they're not so good at and need some help with, and then what they need to do next, and fundamentally, how are we going to support them to get there? And then we're finding some of the pedagogical principles find their way into this item: support and challenge learners effectively to ensure they all make progress. And then there's a list then of the sorts of things that we could see would be useful as in items for the responsibilities and roles for practitioners. So being clear about what they intend for pupils to learn whilst they plan learning experiences. Another high value item for me is that they produce focused feedback that engages the learners actively and encourage them to take responsibility for their own learning and moves the learning forward. So the guidance itself provides us with some really clear and, as we see them, effective references to making this work. And again, here's the responsibilities for learners with the next item in English. So, I think we could make this explicit more to pupils, that actually they've got a role to play in here, that they need to engage actively with us and they need to participate and contribute to the learning process. So, and then when they don't feel that it's appropriate, but they let us know, obviously in a sensitive way. And there's 5 or 6 items there that would be supportive of those learners having a really good role in this progression item and in this piece of principal progression. So, do learners understand where they are? Can they articulate to us what they can and can't do and what their next steps are? Do they understand or have an understanding of what it is that they will do in order to get to the next step? Have they considered it? Do they actively respond to feedback? So, often we see that teachers and practitioners spend a disproportionate amount of time perhaps leaving a comment or some feedback to pupils that aren't acted upon. So it's a responsibility of the learner to make sure that they do that and that they review their own learning. And I know this is a continuum from 3 to 16, and is it not so appropriate perhaps for some younger pupils to review the quality of their own learning? But at a basic level, we would want to make sure that that's appropriate. And of course, we want pupils to be able to have the opportunities to and engage with a discussion about how their learning has progressed over time. So as to learn from perhaps their mistakes and or to reflect on practice that's been effective to support their learning in the past. And then lastly, as I see it, another set of next steps that where we're not, that is, we need to construct a draft document that reflects, broadly speaking, what I've shared today. And then the steps, I haven't organized the steps here, but we obviously need to engage with stakeholders in the development of the sections. What I mean by that is those broad headings they need to be elaborated on, but contributed by practitioners. And then in the document, however we can, signpost effective practice or spotlights, as it might be, in each of the areas or some of the areas in order to, for us to grab hold of this. And whether we do that by naming individual schools or settings, or whether we do that anonymously, so we're just highlighting some effective practice at a principal level, would be a decision that we can take perhaps around this group. And that's the end of the presentation, Chair, and certainly happy to take questions as appropriate.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. A lot of detail, a lot of words, a lot of detail, and clear sort of complexity and food for thought. So can I ask committee members if they did I hear Lyndon speak? I think Lyndon thought he was in the scrutiny committee meeting then. Was that you, Lyndon? No, is it someone else? I think it's an overlap of roles for a second. Can I ask committee members for their comments? Could you put your hands up, please? For me, as people are thinking about their questions and finding the buttons to press, thanks for that, Di. It's as ever very helpful. For me, my general feeling is this, right? How do we step with Welsh Government guidance? Comply with mandatory. That mandatory is a big word here, while at the same time allowing clusters to contextualise, schools to implement with clear, measurable understanding for all of the people involved in the process of monitoring the learner progress. And for me, I sometimes thinking, no detriment to parents, but lowest common denominator. This is a world of lots of guidance, lots of words, and professionalized educational comments and acronyms and all sorts of things here. How do we make sure that we communicate the key challenges and what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, and how we're going to measure progress for the lowest common denominator sort of thing? And how do we get away from the wordy guidance to clear, color-coded graphical displays, perhaps? We've heard the word steps mentioned a few times, progress at different levels, what success looks like at different ages. When do we put our thumbs up as appropriate learner progress, depending on the age and understanding of the child? But that seems to some of this stuff sometimes hurts my head. It's a lot of words, a lot of guidance, but we've got to interpret, take it on board, make it real, make it practical, and encourage as many people as possible to get engaged with the process of change, really. But that's I can see Fiona Gordon has got a hand up. Councillor Gordon.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks, Chair. Similarly, I agree with all the principles of progression that are laid out, and absolutely right that you'd hope that learners would demonstrate in those things to show that they were moving forward in their own learning. I just wondered what would be the next steps then underneath the broad principles to make this a reality for teachers, to be able to look at their class chart and say, this one is making progress, this one isn't making as good progress for themselves, or this one isn't making progress. Would there be more sort of a concrete guidance underneath that?
Thanks. And yeah, thanks, Fiona. Mike, you asked a question, and Fiona, I'll come to you if I can. Secondly, you asked a question about how are we contextualizing this in clusters. There is a practical way that's happening, and that's called a shared understanding of progression through the sharing of common the word's gone out of my head now. Common, they're not themes, but concepts. So it's a concept-driven curriculum map that's been developed by clusters that's appropriate for their learners in their locality, for example. They're AOLE, their area of learning and experience specific, and they describe in simple practitioner form what a child should be doing in year 3, in year 4, example. Now, that's what clusters have done. We've supported that as a local authority. But the difficulty we have is what I think what we're looking for takes us back to curriculum orders 2008, and we need to be careful that we don't provide too much detailed guidance about what progress in an individual learner looks like, because it's very difficult for the local authority to describe that. It's for a school to describe that, their understanding of that, and unfortunately I know what you're saying, the principles hurt my head as well. You can imagine how much it hurt to prepare for this, and I'm a practitioner, and I want to get back to what is it that it looks like, Fiona, onto your point, for a child in a school. But I don't think that we're in a position to provide that level of detail for schools and settings, because Curriculum for Wales asks us not to in its principles. So, but I hear that these are words, right? And I suppose what I'm struggling with is I haven't got a document to give you because it's nowhere near ready for that. But I would like to think it's much more practical than what you've just seen now. Okay, and I depending on timeline, you know, I would definitely like for you to be able to reflect on what we produce, in order for you to make a judgment on that and where it swings closer towards practically based. So,
thank you, Di. Councillor Robert Smith, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And can I echo the thanks to Di for leading us both through the presentation, but perhaps more importantly, for the thinking work that's gone in to developing what you've presented this afternoon, because I think it is impressive and I think it is exactly what is needed. And the discussion you've just had with Fiona, I think, encapsulates where we are. We don't want to be too prescriptive. We can't be too prescriptive in terms of what we expect schools to be doing. But I think schools need that support, and they need someone working with them. And it's no criticism of schools. What this is a recognition of, you know, we don't want schools to be left on their own struggling. They need other people to work with, and that's why the partnership is so important. The partnership between local authority and schools is going to be vital in this. And I think if we have that collaborative approach, then I think we have a chance of achieving what we're trying to achieve here. But we don't want to leave schools unsupported, while at the same time we can't be prescriptive. And I think it's getting the balance between the two things is going to be absolutely crucial. From what I've seen this afternoon, David, I think yes, we're on the right lines. And of course, this is a process that's going to be ongoing. It's going to require ongoing discussion with schools. It's not a task and finish, unlike perhaps the national curriculum had been. This is something that's likely to be changing all the time in response to different circumstances as school, as the requirements on schools will change, as the curriculum will develop, as society will develop. And I think that's something that needs to be recognised. So full thanks from me for what's gone on already, and I look forward to watching the work develop, Di.
Thank you very much, Robert. Can I ask Di and maybe Robert and of course Rodri? So one of the key challenges that we have, would I be right in saying that one of the key things for us as the education directorate would be one of the key things is to offer an assurance, in a sense, making sure that people feel the Swansea way will be, look, these are the parameters within which learner progress will have context, have meaning, and make sense. And we've got your backs, you know, to offer reassurance, to say, look, these are the principles that we need to work within, and to give people real confidence, so that we don't have people across our estate all worrying about this stuff and looking at the complexity and maybe feeling the pressure that comes with what is sometimes a dauntingly bureaucratic process. Would that be a fair thing to ask about there?
I think it would be, Mike, if I can give a political answer first and then perhaps call the opposite. And I think it would be. What I would also say is the flip side to that is the strength and the deep thinking that's already going on in schools. You know, they are working with these children on a daily basis, and I think it's a matter of harnessing the expertise that we've got within our schools among practitioners, and taking that forward as much as it is what you described there. So I think it's a combination of both, that we harness what we've got and grow the expertise in schools, as well as supporting the work on the ground.
Thank you, Robert. Rodri?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think it's around supporting our schools with the complexities. I think we've all sort of seen within Di's presentation, and I think in fairness to Di, as in it's us supporting the schools and understanding the complexities of what we've seen there today, so that they can apply them in their own individual settings. And obviously, as a school improvement team and as the Achievement Partnership Service, we'll continue then to support the schools on their journeys through that in the professional learning offer that we provide, and also any professional learning offer that we need to broker on their behalves. But I agree with you, as in I think we do need that sort of a more simplistic view for the wider audience, but it's very much around supporting our schools in this space with these principles. And I think also with a nod to what Di mentioned in the further work, it's the importance of involving our stakeholders now in that process. I think that's what we do well in Swansea, is once we start on a journey, we involve our schools at that very right time in shaping it, so that we're not imposing something. I think in years gone past, local authorities have fallen foul where this is our interpretation of what Welsh Government have said, over to you, crack on. Whereas I think we're in a much more mature place as far as our relationship with our school leaders is that we then develop with them how this would impact on their clusters, on their individual schools then. So I think you're right in the points that you're making on that one, Chair.
Thank you, Rodri. There's a couple of comments. Councillor Lyndon Jones. Lyndon?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think the point that Rodri made then, it really is important to involve the schools in shaping it as you move forward, because, and I think from what I've seen with schools, they have the confidence to take part in that, and they're not worried about doing it. And I think that's a really, really good point, that they're keen to work together and share that practice too.
Thanks, Lyndon. I know Di said about whether we should name schools and how we should go forward with this, and I can understand there could be some sensitivities there. I have mentioned Gendros School, and examples of very good practice that blew me away and the rest of the governing body a few months ago. And when we see practice in schools, it really reaffirms all the time that there is excellence. You know, that level of excellence is there. Now we build and expand and extrapolate on that more widely, I think, is perhaps a key challenge. I did have one question, Di, about this reference to vulnerability. I like that. I like your reference to vulnerability and free school meals. And we know there's, it's not it can be helpful, but it's not, a be all and end all. And one of the things that occurred to me was the additional pressures put on families that became vulnerable with mortgage increases in recent years, and I spoke to some families where their mortgage payments went up £500 a month. So families, mum and dad, both working, doing very well. And the next thing, great vulnerability because they couldn't afford school uniforms. So that flexibility there, I think, is fundamentally important, that we don't just kind of pigeonhole people and say, oh yes, vulnerable people, and then leave it and off we go and move forward. So are you saying that there needs to be that flexibility built into learner progress? So there's some sort of empathy and flex in the system to provide additional support, perhaps as and when required, depending on the changing circumstances of families?
I think 100%. I acknowledge what you're saying. I was making reference to the groups of pupils when it comes to the guidance around understanding pupil progress for the group, and EFSM pupils being one of them. I think, if I'm honest with you, I think schools identify vulnerability particularly well, but and they mitigate against those identified vulnerability factors, as you've mentioned. Although in that particular case, around progression, it might not mean that they apply different set of criteria to that particular pupil that's in that family, because their learning journey might be the same. It's just they might need some support to remove the barriers that would probably be emotional ones, and schools do that particularly well. They remove those barriers through a wide array of support. And I know that, Chair, because I'm saying it out loud now, so here we go. But currently, the inspection profile in Swansea there isn't one school that has a recommendation that hasn't for 3 years around well-being for pupils, children, young people in Swansea. So that tells me across the piece, nearly 70 schools inspected, we're doing okay. So broadly speaking, we break the barriers well. I don't think we would of course adjust our approach to vulnerable pupils, but it wouldn't necessarily prevent or change the system, if that makes sense. So yeah, but I think schools already do that particularly well.
Thank you, Di. The final area that I was interested in related to when the curriculum for Wales was first discussed a long time ago. We saw those graphics coming out, some nice colourful graphics. This is what we're talking about. This is what we mean. So when I referred to graphics when I kicked off, I thought about that. When I first had children quite a long time ago now, what's the child supposed to do at any given point? What should I be looking for, right? And I remember the NHS timeline, you know, when do they walk? When do they talk? When do they sit up? When do they feed themselves? Is my child normal? Is it going in the right direction? You know, all those anxieties and nervousness that you feel as a new parent. And I wonder whether we couldn't sort of steal some lessons as we go forward from that kind of approach. You know, not to be prescriptive at all. And everything's got to be localized, of course, but for people to understand, parents, carers, and others, not just as practitioners of the school, as you alluded to earlier, but for parents to say, look, yeah, my child's on the right track. My child's on the right path. Another experience from my own background was about reading standards and being supported by schools to check the reading progress of my kids when they were young. You know, is he on the right level here? Is he reading at his kind of level? Because I don't know. I mean, I'm a new parent and now he's 5, 6, whatever. Yes. This is the way it works, Mr. Dirk. We do it this. Thank you very much. Really helpful. And is that an opportunity then for us to engage more and more parents with the learning journey? You know, to say to parents, you are fundamentally, in law, you have parental responsibility for your children. Don't just think they're off in school and you can forget about them. Please, this is how you support the learning progress. And maybe that could lead then to, you know, parental classes where required for parents themselves to improve their own capacity in the educational context. But that strikes me as sort of opportunities. Di?
Yeah, again, you know, really valid point you bring there. There is a couple of things that exist in the Curriculum for Wales guidance. The descriptions of learning provide a marker in the sand, for want of a better phrase, to describe, broadly speaking, I think what you've set out, perhaps not in as much detail as the NHS timeline will have. And we would encourage, as part of this principal paper, that schools make good use of comparative summary analysis, you know, tests, for example, reading tests that would enable a little bit more diagnosis around that particular item. Reading is one of them. So absolutely, yeah, that would be reflected in this guidance 100%. You know, just to provide that standardized view of pupil progress, and of course the use of the statutory personalized assessments, national tests, because they're there. They should be used at least twice a year to inform the progress and or the deficiencies that pupils have in those key skills: reading, numeracy, and reasoning and procedural mathematics. So yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you, Di. Okay, committee members, I can't see anybody else indicating. People are looking quite content there. So we can move on from this. Di, can I, once again, as committee members have already done, can I thank you very much for yet another very thorough and detailed report, necessarily challenging. This is critical work for us as we go forward, but it's really helping us to understand the challenges and to plot a way forward. As we then move on to the next item on the agenda, which is our work plan for the rest of the year. So the next committee meeting we've got planned is the 15th of January, where we go back to Kate Phillips and supporting positive behaviour in schools. 19th of February, learner progress with Di, and then the 9th of April when we bring together the final reports. So in January, just to update the committee, I was hoping that we could have a little light shone into challenges faced by some of our colleagues. And I've invited somebody from South Wales Police to come in and talk about some of the challenges that South Wales Police find in community engagement, engaging with families and children and all the rest of it. There's lots of changes going on now for many support agencies, not least within the context of policing. And we know there's a new neighbourhood policing guarantee being rolled out and so on. So will we see support for schools and communities in this context, very important context? We know that some people live in quite chaotic circumstances, unfortunately. So that partnership ethos is critical. I haven't heard back from my colleague in South Wales Police yet. He has said he would come along, but I think that might be an interesting thing for us to focus on in that next meeting. But I'll keep you informed before then, of course. So, okay, on that point, I can't see anybody indicating. The next meeting for us is on the Wednesday, the 15th of January at 4 o'clock. And the last thing to say really is Merry Christmas to everybody, live from Santa's Grotto in Ravenhill, as you can see behind me, and to wish you all a very happy and healthy Christmas and New Year break. Thank you all very much for your effort, your commitment, and in what is a critically important area of work. And can I thank Cabinet Member Councillor Robert Smith for his continued support for this committee, and his insights are always, of course, invaluable as we plot our way into 2025 and beyond. Okay, thanks everybody. Merry Christmas.
Thanks,
Thank
Merry
you.
Christmas. Good night, everyone.
Bye.